Enggak, suaramu kerekam.
We're back and we're looking at the moon in Johannesburg, South Africa, here on timeanddate.com, streaming live, total lunar eclipse of this July. And we've just talked to CEO, Stefan Torsten, in Santorini, Greece, who was there in our mobile observatory. And he just told us that he'd been there on holiday the year before and saw that it was a great place to go and film an eclipse. But we are streaming from a couple of other places, Graham. You've got some information about that.
Yes. So Stefan was saying, how difficult it is to find good partners to do these kinds of broadcasts, because it is a really complicated business bringing these telescope images of the eclipsed moon. And we're really lucky today that we're working with a fabulous team of people at 2 observatories in the Southern Hemisphere. So firstly, in Perth, in Western Australia, we have Matt Woods and his fabulous team at the Perth Observatory. This is an historic old observatory. It's the oldest observatory in Western Australia. It's actually about 35 kilometers east of Perth, in a place called Bickley, to the east of Perth.
And then we have Perth's moon up there.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, right. See, fabulous images from Perth Observatory. Actually, one of the claims to fame that the Perth Observatory has is that an astronomer there in 1977, Peter Birch, who worked at the Perth Observatory, he helped with the discovery of the ring system around Uranus. Saturn is very famous for having a very beautiful ring system, but in fact all of the giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus and Neptune, all have ring systems. The rings around Uranus were discovered in 1977, and Perth Observatory played a key role in that discovery. So it really is it's a famous old observatory there in Perth.
And Matt and their team helped us a lot last time we were streaming our total lunar eclipse in January as well.
Oh yeah, and they do fabulous work there in Perth. They do fabulous outreach programs. They do wonderful astronomy events for people. Everyone there is so knowledgeable, so enthusiastic, so professional. I mean, we've all had lots of fun working with them for this broadcast. So yeah, that is a wonderful place, Perth Observatory in Western Australia. Absolutely.
And then we have Johannesburg.
That's right. So in Johannesburg, we have Jerome Joost and his team at the Old Republic Observatory in Johannesburg. This is another historic observatory. This dates back to 1903 is when it first started operating. And the observatory in Johannesburg also has a very notable claim to fame. In 1915, so this was 12 years after the observatory started operating, the director of the observatory, who was Robert Innes, he was responsible for discovering the very faint star of Proxima Centauri, which is a very important star because it is the closest star to the sun. It's just over 4 light years away. It's the sun's closest neighbor. It's a very faint star, so it needed some careful measurement and some careful observation, and it was the observatory in Johannesburg that made that discovery. So again, there in Johannesburg, we have another very historic and very important observatory.
Okay. And we can talk a bit more about the Danjon scale, I think. Who is Danjon?
Right. So, where are we now? How far are we from the start of the total eclipse? We are about 10, 11 minutes away from the start of totality. The Earth's shadow has nearly completely covered the moon now. We can see that there's just that very thin part of the moon that is left as that silvery color. When totality starts, all of that silvery bit will disappear. The moon will be completely covered in the Earth's shadow. And at this point, the moon will turn a red color. Now, one of the interesting things with lunar eclipses is that we never know exactly what shade of red the moon is going to turn. The first question, of course, is, the first question is, in fact, why does the moon turn red? We shouldn't be able to see it at all, because if you think about it, we have the sun and the earth and the moon. The earth is exactly between the sun and the moon. It's blocking all of the sunlight from reaching the moon directly. So in theory, the moon should completely disappear. But the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere. It has this layer of air about 100 kilometers thick, and this air actually bends the sunlight around the earth.
So we actually do have an illustration of that. If Jonas can get it up, we can look at our illustration of how there you go. It's quite complicated.
Okay, yeah. So what we're looking at here, there's two things that are going on here. So the first thing is that the Earth, as you look from the moon, the Earth is bigger than the sun. So the Earth is completely covering up the sun. It's completely stopping sunlight from reaching the moon directly. But the atmosphere is doing two things. The first thing it's doing is it's bending the light around the Earth. It's refracting the light around the solid body of the Earth and sending it to the moon. The other thing that the atmosphere is doing is it's filtering the light. It is scattering the light. In fact, it's scattering out all of the blue color from the sunlight. When we look up at the sky on a sunny day, we see a blue sky because the Earth's atmosphere is busy scattering the blue color from the sun's light in all these different directions, and that's why we see a blue sky. Also, if you look at the Earth's atmosphere from space, you can see this blue sort of haze as the blue light is scattered off of the atmosphere. That's what we can see on this diagram with these crazy blue lines scattering off in all directions. Now, of course, if the blue light is getting scattered away, it's getting filtered out, which means that the only light that is left in the sunlight is at the red end of the spectrum. So the sunlight that is being bent by the atmosphere and sent towards the moon has been filtered, and it has this red tint to it.
But it can be brown, right?
Right. So this is the thing that we never know for sure, because the Earth's atmosphere, how much scattering goes on, what kind of color the sunlight ends up as, all depends on the composition of the atmosphere that is doing the scattering. It depends on what kind of particles are in the atmosphere at the point where it's getting filtered. And if there are things, for example, at the moment, there are many forest fires going on at the moment. We've had those terrible fires in Greece, up in Scandinavia. There have been lots of fires. There are many fires going on in the USA at the moment. These kinds of things can put particles into the atmosphere, which can scatter the light in slightly different ways, affect slightly different wavelengths, and it can give a slightly different tint to the color of the light that is sent out towards the moon. Of course, other factors that are at play, it also depends how deep into the umbra the Earth goes. Compared to 6 months ago, for example, today the moon is going into the very, very center of the Earth's shadow, the even darker part of
darker.
So with that, you would expect it to be darker. Exactly. Yes. And you were asking about Danjon.
Yeah, Danjon, the funny name.
So this is a French astronomer who decided to try and quantify the color that a moon goes during a total lunar eclipse. If we can get the
Danjon scale up, it would be good to be able to see what that scale looks like. You can explain a bit more while we wait for that.
Okay. So he came up with a 5-point scale which describes the color of the moon during a total lunar eclipse. It runs from 0 up to 4. 0 is the very darkest color. This is where the moon goes so dark it becomes almost invisible. We then go up through stages 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4 is the lightest shade during an eclipse. This is a kind of a copper red, an orange color. That's the very lightest shade of red we can see. And then the numbers in between, number 3 is a slightly darker red, like a brick red color. Number 2 on the Danjon scale becomes this much darker rust-colored shade, and then number 1 is a dark. It's a grayish brown color.
And the Santorini moon looks a bit like that right now, doesn't it? But we're closing in on the total stage of this eclipse.
Right. So as we look at the Santorini moon here, of course, at this stage, it's still very difficult for the camera and the telescope to pick up that red color, because we still have that very bright silvery part of the moon up in the top right corner there. So trying to get a balance with the cameras and the filters is always a real challenge with this. But we are starting to see, yes, we can now see this red tint that the moon is taking on. The color will develop over the course of totality as well. Remember, we have this very long 1 hour 43 minutes of totality. So we might see it starting off as a slightly lighter shade of red and becoming a darker shade as the moon moves deeper into the umbra. But it will be interesting to see what kind of tint we get today. It could well be a very, very dark tint.
And it can and it can be interesting to see what you people watching us and watching the moon are seeing. You can hashtag us on Time and Date Live, and we can watch your pictures on Instagram and on Twitter and on Facebook. And also you can actually upload pictures on our timeanddate.live blog page. There's an uploader there. And any questions you have for me and Graham, you can send to live@timeanddate.com. And as we're coming into the total phase here, I think we're going to take away the Danjon scale to make sure that we see the whole moon. I think we're going to stay and look at Santorini. Maybe if we're lucky, we can get the Johannesburg moon above me here on the screen. And you can tell us what we're in for, Graham.
Yeah, so now here we are. Then we're about 1 minute away from the start of totality. So the silvery edge of the moon has almost completely disappeared now. We just have that very, very small slither of silver on the very edge of the moon, and we are now really starting to see this red color here. Of course, the very best way to experience this color is to have a look up in the sky. So if you are anywhere on the nighttime side of the Earth at the moment, if the moon is up above the horizon,
this is the time.
Right, this is a fantastic time to get out and to see this red moon, and as you said, we would love to hear from people what Danjon number they would give the moon, because it's a very subjective exercise, this, and it does vary from observer to observer. In different parts of the world, it can look a slightly different color depending on the conditions at your location. So yeah, we would love to hear from people how they would describe this red color of the moon.
And we're into totality, aren't we?
And there we are. We are now into the total phase of the eclipse, and so begins the longest period of totality of the 21st century. We have 1 hour and 43 minutes of totality.
And on that note, we're going to leave you to look at this beautiful view, and make sure to look at us on timeanddate.live, and send us your questions, send us your pictures, hashtag timeanddate.live and live@timeanddate.com. And welcome back. We're looking at the totally eclipsed moon over Santorini, Greece, here on timeanddate.com. And welcome back, Graham.
Well, hey, it's great to be back. And while we've been off air, we've been talking about these images, and this to us here does look to be a much darker eclipse than the one we had 6 months ago.
It was much brighter
in January. Right, it was definitely much brighter last time. Of course, again, we're at a different location. We're getting these images with different equipment, different telescopes, different cameras. So it's always very difficult to compare directly these images. But at the moment, this would appear to be a much darker eclipse than the one we had 6 months ago.
It looks that way. And there's also one funny thing that happens. Moonrise, moonset, sunrise, sunset. They happen almost at the same time, the sunrise and the moonset. But not, right?
Right. This is one of the curious things about lunar eclipses. So right now, across Western Europe, the sun is setting and the moon is rising. Over here in East Asia, the sun is rising and the moon is setting. And what we're looking at on the screen here is a moonlight world map. This has divided the Earth into two sections. We have the lighter section, which shows the areas that can see the moon at the moment. We can see the red eclipsed moon. It's directly over the Indian Ocean at the moment, and we can see the half of the world there that can see the moon. The other half, the darker area, that is where the sun is at the moment. So North America, for example, in the middle of the day, with the sun in their skies. So this shows the boundary between the nighttime side of the Earth that can see the moon and the daytime side of the Earth that can see the sun. But if we look at where these two zones meet, we can see that there is a very narrow strip where people can see both the moon and the sun. This is that very sort of narrow light strip that runs between the moon side of the Earth and the sun side of the Earth.
But does that mean they're up at the same time?
Right. So this means that, I mean, if we look at London, for example, we can see that London right now, the sun is setting on one side, and on the other side, the moon is rising. The moon is coming up, and of course, this does need some thinking about, because how come you can see the sun and the moon at the same time? Because we know that the moon and the Earth and the sun are aligned in space. We know that the moon is completely within the Earth's